Picture this. It's 1985, and Ronald Reagan is sipping his morning coffee in the Oval Office, probably thinking about his next Hollywood anecdote to share at a cabinet meeting. Meanwhile, somewhere in the shadowy corridors of power, a handful of men in expensive suits are orchestrating what would become one of the most convoluted political scandals in American history. Welcome to the Iran-Contra Affair, a story so twisted, it makes modern political dramas look like children's bedtime stories. The Iran-Contra Affair wasn't born in a single moment of corruption. No, it was more like a slow brewing storm, gathering momentum through a series of seemingly disconnected decisions made by people who believed they knew better than Congress, the American people, and perhaps even reality itself. To understand this labyrinthine tale, we need to step into the worn leather shoes of the players involved, feel the weight of their morning newspapers, and smell the stale coffee that fueled their late-night scheming sessions. Let's begin with Nicaragua, a small Central American nation that had become the unlikely stage for Cold War theatrics. The Sandinistas, a leftist revolutionary group, had overthrown the brutal Somoza dictatorship in 1979. To many Nicaraguans, this felt like liberation. Imagine finally being able to speak freely after decades of oppression, or seeing your children learn to read in schools that weren't controlled by foreign interests. But to Reagan's administration, the Sandinistas represented something far more sinister, another domino falling to communism in America's backyard. Enter the Contras, anti-Sandinista rebels who became Reagan's chosen instruments of democracy, though their methods were often anything but democratic. Picture ragged fighters moving through jungle mist at dawn, funded by a nation thousands of miles away, carrying weapons they barely understood in service of an ideology that promised them everything but delivered mostly death. Reagan famously called them freedom fighters, comparing them to America's founding fathers, a comparison that must have felt particularly hollow to the Nicaraguan farmers caught in the crossfire. But here's where the story takes its first dramatic turn. In 1984, Congress, growing weary of endless proxy wars, passed the Boland Amendment, effectively cutting off funding to the Contras. You can almost picture the congressional halls that day, tired representatives shuffling papers, perhaps thinking they were finally putting an end to another costly foreign adventure. They had no idea they were simply forcing the operation underground, into the realm of creative financing and constitutional gymnastics. This is where our second protagonist enters, Iran, a nation that had been America's enemy since the 1979 hostage crisis. Imagine the bitter irony. The same Reagan who had built his reputation on being tough with Iran was now secretly preparing to sell them weapons. The justification was almost poetic in its cynicism: arm Iran to help free American hostages held by Iranian-backed groups in Lebanon, then use the profits to fund the Contras. It was like trying to solve a puzzle by breaking it into smaller, more complicated pieces. The architect of this scheme was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a Marine whose dedication to duty had somehow transformed into a willingness to subvert the very democratic institutions he had sworn to protect. Picture North in his basement office, surrounded by shredded documents and secure phone lines, believing with every fiber of his being that he was saving America from itself. His days were filled with coded conversations, Swiss bank accounts, and the kind of moral flexibility that comes from viewing yourself as the hero in your own spy novel. North wasn't working alone. CIA Director William Casey, a man who seemed to view congressional oversight as merely a suggestion, provided crucial support. Casey was old-school intelligence, the kind of man who remembered when the agency could operate without constantly looking over its shoulder at congressional committees. In his mind, this operation was just good old-fashioned American problem-solving, albeit with better technology and more exotic locations. Then there was National Security Advisor John Poindexter, who elevated plausible deniability to an art form. Poindexter understood that sometimes protecting the president meant keeping him in the dark, a philosophy that would prove as problematic as it was well-intentioned. Imagine the surreal conversations in the White House, where critical national security decisions were made through nods, winks, and carefully worded euphemisms. The operation itself was a masterclass in bureaucratic creativity. Arms dealers with questionable reputations facilitated weapons sales to Iran. The profits were then funneled through a network of Swiss bank accounts, private foundations, and front companies before eventually reaching the Contras in Nicaragua. It was like a financial shell game played with national security, where the P was American foreign policy and the shells were layers of deniability. For a while, it seemed to work. American hostages were occasionally released, though more often than not, new ones were taken. The Contras continued their guerrilla war, though their effectiveness remained questionable. And most importantly for the architects of the scheme, Reagan's approval ratings remained high, untainted by the knowledge of what was being done in democracy's name. But scandals, like secrets, have a way of refusing to stay buried. In November 1986, a Lebanese magazine published details of the Iranian arms sales. Suddenly, the carefully constructed house of cards began to collapse. Picture the panic in Washington that day: phone calls at dawn, hastily scheduled meetings, and the sickening realization that years of careful planning were unraveling in real time. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Congressional hearings dominated television screens, turning complex geopolitical maneuvering into must-see TV. Oliver North, testifying in his Marine uniform, became an unlikely folk hero to some and a symbol of government overreach to others. Reagan, the master communicator, found himself struggling to explain how such extensive operations could occur without his knowledge. The Iran-Contra Affair revealed something fundamental about American democracy: the tension between security and transparency, between effective action and constitutional governance. It showed how easily good intentions can justify questionable means, and how the very people sworn to protect democracy can become its greatest threat. In the end, it wasn't just a story about arms deals and proxy wars. It was a meditation on power, accountability, and the price of secrets in a democratic society. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded us that even in the land of the free, freedom requires constant vigilance against those who would protect it to death.